The moment Marcus Hall walked through our front door, I knew my wife hadn't told me the whole truth. Sarah had mentioned inviting her college friend to her birthday party, but the way her entire body language shifted when he arrived, the subtle straightening of her shoulders, the way she unconsciously touched her hair, the smile that seemed just a fraction too bright, set off every alarm bell I didn't even know I had. 8 years of marriage teaches you to read your spouse's tells. Sarah Miller had always been vivacious, the kind of woman who lit up rooms and made everyone feel like they were her best friend. But this was different. This was the kind of energy you reserve for someone special, someone who makes your pulse quicken in ways that have nothing to do with friendship. "David, come meet Marcus." Sarah called out, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that made my stomach tighten. "He's the one I've told you about from college." Except she hadn't told me about him. Not really. In our 8 years together, through countless conversations about college memories, old friends, and shared stories, Marcus Hall's name had never come up. Not once. And I have a good memory for details. It's what made me successful in marketing. I remember campaigns from 5 years ago, client preferences from casual conversations, the small details that matter. So how had this supposedly important college friend remained invisible until 6 months ago? When Sarah started mentioning him in passing, I extended my hand to Marcus, studying his face as we shook. He was younger than us, maybe 29, with that easy confidence that comes from never having to work too hard for anything. Good-looking in that effortless way that made other men instinctively dislike him. But it wasn't his appearance that bothered me. It was the way he looked at Sarah. And more importantly, the way she looked back. "Great to finally meet you, David," Marcus said, his grip firm, but not trying to prove anything. "Sarah talks about you all the time." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost believed it. Almost. But I'd spent 2 years in couples therapy when we were struggling to conceive, learning to read micro-expressions and body language. Marcus's eyes never quite met mine when he spoke about Sarah mentioning me. Classic deflection behavior. Throughout the evening, I found myself watching them without appearing to watch. It's a skill you develop in marketing, observing consumer behavior without making them feel studied. Sarah and Marcus had a rhythm and unspoken communication that comes from spending significant time together. When she moved toward the kitchen, he somehow knew to follow and help with drinks. When she laughed at someone else's joke, his eyes would find her face first, checking her reaction before deciding how to respond himself. The most telling moment came when Sarah's friend Jenny asked Marcus how he knew Sarah from college. I was across the room, supposedly engaged in conversation with Tom Parker about the Broncos season, but my attention zeroed in on their exchange. "Oh, we had several classes together," Marcus replied, smoothly. "Graphics and design theory mostly. Sarah was always the most talented in our program." Sarah nodded along, but I caught the micro-hesitation before she smiled. The same pause she used to have when she'd tell her mother we were still trying for kids, but weren't ready to discuss fertility treatments yet. The pause of someone coordinating a story they'd rehearsed but weren't completely comfortable with. "Which classes exactly?" Jenny pressed, and I silently thanked her for her natural curiosity. "Advanced typography and visual communication theory." Sarah jumped in, speaking faster than normal. Marcus always helped me with the technical aspects. I made mental notes. Advanced typography, visual communication theory. Sarah had gone to Colorado State for graphic design, and I'd heard her mention most of her classes over the years when she talked about her education. These course names sounded generic enough to be believable, but specific enough to end questions. Perfectly crafted lies. As the evening progressed, I noticed other things. The way Marcus knew exactly how Sarah liked her wine, not just white, but specifically Sauvignon Blanc chilled, but not too cold. The way he anticipated her needs, refilling her glass before she had to ask, appearing with a napkin when she spilled a drop of sauce. These weren't the actions of a casual college friend reconnecting after years apart. This was intimate knowledge built through recent repeated contact. The breaking point came when Sarah opened her gifts. She'd received the usual array of birthday presents from our friends, wine candles, a beautiful scarf from Lisa, who always had impeccable taste. When she reached Marcus's gift, her entire demeanor changed. The wrapping was elegant, expensive-looking. Inside was a first edition of a graphic design book by Paul Rand, something I had never heard her mention wanting, but that she clearly recognized immediately. "Marcus, this is incredible," she breathed, and for the first time all evening her reaction seemed completely genuine. "I can't believe you found this. I remembered you mentioning it," he said quietly, and their eyes held for a moment too long. That's when I knew. Not suspected, not wondered, knew. Because Sarah had never mentioned Paul Rand to me, not in 8 years of marriage, not in countless conversations about her work and inspirations. But somehow this college friend, who'd been back in her life for 6 months, knew exactly what would make her face light up like Christmas morning. The rest of the party passed in a blur of forced smiles and automatic responses. I played the part of the happy husband, chatted with guests, helped clean up all while my mind raced through months of small inconsistencies that suddenly made perfect sense. The late nights at work that had become more frequent. The way she'd started putting her phone face down on tables. The new workout routine that had her up earlier and dressed more carefully than usual. As the last guests left and Marcus gave Sarah what looked like a perfectly innocent goodbye hug, I felt something shift inside me. The trusting husband who'd spent 8 years believing in the fundamental honesty of our relationship was dying, replaced by someone I didn't recognize yet, but was about to become very familiar with. Sarah closed the door behind Marcus and turned to me with that bright smile that no longer seemed quite real. "That was fun, wasn't it? I think everyone had a great time." I nodded, wrapping my arms around her waist in what she would interpret as post-party affection, but what felt more like holding on to the last moments of my old life. "Yeah," I said, kissing the top of her head and breathing in the scent of her shampoo, wondering how long it had been since I was the only man who got to do this. It was perfect. But as we turned off the lights and headed to bed, I was already planning my next moves. Because if 8 years of marriage had taught me to read Sarah's tells, 2 years of fertility struggles had taught me something even more valuable: how to be patient, methodical, and strategic when everything you want most in the world is on the line. The old David would have confronted her immediately, demanded answers, probably gotten half-truths, and explanations that would have satisfied his need to believe. The new David, the one born the moment I saw Marcus's gift and Sarah's reaction, was going to be much more careful. The Monday after Sarah's birthday party, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed uninterrupted time to think, to plan, and to start connecting the dots that had been scattered in front of me for months. I sat in my home office surrounded by the life Sarah and I had built together, photos from our honeymoon in Italy, the silly couple's mug set Lisa had given us as a housewarming gift, Sarah's design awards lined up on the bookshelf, and opened my laptop. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. First, I created a timeline. Marketing had taught me the power of data visualization, and betrayal, I was learning, required the same analytical approach. I started with 6 months ago when Sarah had first mentioned Marcus. Not by name initially, just casual references to a new colleague who was really creative and someone at work who understood her vision. Looking back with fresh eyes, the pattern was obvious. The mentions became more frequent, but also more careful. Marcus and I had lunch became a few of us grabbed lunch. Marcus suggested this new design approach became someone at work had an interesting idea. She'd been gradually training me to hear his name without questioning his presence in her life. I pulled up our phone records online, something I'd never done before, but that took embarrassingly little effort with our shared account. Sarah's texting patterns told a story I wished I couldn't read. Starting 6 months ago, there was a significant spike in her daily text volume. Not just a few extra messages, but sometimes over 100 additional texts per day. The timing was surgical in its precision. Heavy texting during her commute lunch hours, and especially in the evenings when she claimed to be catching up on work emails. But the most revealing pattern was the dead zones periods, where she'd normally text me throughout the day, but had gone completely silent. Those gaps corresponded perfectly with when she'd claimed to be in important meetings or dealing with difficult clients. I cross-referenced this with her social media activity. Sarah had always been active on Instagram, posting design work pictures of us, snapshots of her daily life. But 6 months ago, her posting pattern changed dramatically. Fewer pictures of us together. More work-in-progress shots that seemed designed to establish alibis. And most tellingly, she'd stopped tagging locations entirely. The Sarah who used to geotag everything from our favorite coffee shop to weekend hiking spots had suddenly become privacy-conscious only about where she was spending her time. My phone rang, breaking my concentration. Lisa's name appeared on the screen. "You called in sick," she said without preamble. "You never call in sick. What's wrong?" Lisa Carter had always been protective, but her divorce attorney instincts made her particularly sensitive to relationship distress. I'd called her the night before after Sarah fell asleep, needing to voice my suspicions to someone who would give me straight answers instead of reassuring platitudes. "I'm building a case," I told her, which made her laugh despite the circumstances. "Good. Don't confront her with theories. Get facts, real, undeniable documentary facts." "I'm trying, but I feel like I'm losing my mind. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there." "David." Lisa's voice took on the tone she used with difficult clients. "I've seen you analyze marketing data for hours to find trends that increased sales by 2%. You notice everything. If your gut is telling you something's wrong, something's wrong." She paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I'm going to give you a name. Rebecca Morrison. She's a private investigator who works primarily with divorce cases. She's discreet, professional, and expensive. But if Sarah is having an affair, Rebecca will get you proof that will hold up in court." The word divorce hit me like a physical blow. Even thinking it felt like admitting defeat, acknowledging that 8 years of marriage might be ending, not because we grew apart or wanted different things, but because Sarah had chosen someone else and lied about it. "I don't know if I'm ready for that level of, you don't hire her to end your marriage," Lisa interrupted. "You hire her to save yourself from making decisions based on incomplete information. Maybe she'll prove Sarah's innocent and you can work on whatever's making you feel distant. Or maybe she'll give you the truth you need to protect yourself." After Lisa hung up, I sat staring at Rebecca Morrison's business card for 20 minutes. Hiring a private investigator felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, admitting that my marriage had deteriorated to the point where I was surveilling my own wife. But the alternative, continuing to live in this liminal space of suspicion and doubt, felt worse. I called Rebecca and arranged to meet her that afternoon at her downtown office. Rebecca Morrison was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the gruff ex-cop stereotype, she was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the manner of a therapist. Her office was warm and professional, designed to put people at ease during what was probably the worst period of their lives. "Tell me about your concerns," she said after I'd signed her retainer agreement. I laid out everything: the birthday party, Marcus's gift, the texting patterns, the social media changes, the gradually shifting stories about work colleagues. As I spoke, Rebecca took notes without judgment, asking clarifying questions that made me realize how much I'd actually observed and processed subconsciously. "This is a very typical pattern," she said when I finished. "The good news is that if there is an affair, it's probably still in the early stages based on what you're describing. They're being careful, but not yet expert at deception." "What's the bad news?" Rebecca looked at me with the expression of someone who'd delivered this information many times before. The bad news is that everything you've described is consistent with an active emotional affair that has likely progressed to physical intimacy. The gift, especially that level of thoughtfulness and expense, indicates significant emotional investment. She outlined her process surveillance digital forensics if I could provide access to Sarah's devices and comprehensive documentation that would either confirm or disprove my suspicions within 2 weeks. One more thing, David, Rebecca said as I prepared to leave. Once you have this information, you can't unknow it. Make sure you're ready for whatever truth we uncover. Driving home, I felt like I was inhabiting someone else's life. This morning, I'd been a marketing manager with marriage problems. Now I was a man hiring a private investigator to follow his wife, armed with retainer agreements and surveillance schedules. Sarah was already home when I arrived, working on her laptop at our kitchen island, looking beautiful and familiar and like a stranger all at once. "Feeling better?" she asked, glancing up with what seemed like genuine concern. "Much better," I said, kissing her forehead and meaning it for the first time in months, because for the first time in months I had a plan. Rebecca Morrison called me on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 10 days after I'd hired her. I was sitting in a client presentation discussing quarterly marketing metrics when my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood run cold. "We need to meet. Tonight. I have what you asked for." The rest of the presentation passed in a blur. I nodded at appropriate intervals, answered questions on autopilot, and somehow managed to maintain professional composure while my internal world crumbled. By 5:30, I was sitting across from Rebecca in her office, watching her arrange a manila folder with the careful precision of someone about to detonate a bomb. "David, what I'm about to show you is definitive proof of your wife's affair. Are you absolutely certain you want to see this?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Rebecca opened the folder and slid the first photograph across her desk. It showed Sarah and Marcus outside a hotel. I recognized the boutique place downtown where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. They weren't just talking. Sarah's hand was on Marcus's chest, her face tilted up toward his with an expression of intimacy I thought was reserved for me. "This was taken last Tuesday at 2:30 p.m., Rebecca said quietly. "According to your wife's calendar, which you provided access to, she was supposed to be in a client meeting until 4. The second photograph showed them entering the hotel together. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. They stayed for approximately 2 hours. Rebecca continued sliding over more photos. They've met at this location 6 times in the past 10 days, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always for about 2 hours. My hands were shaking as I looked through the images. There was Sarah, my wife of 8 years, the woman I'd been trying to start a family with, walking into a hotel with another man with the comfort and familiarity of an established routine. "There's more," Rebecca said, her voice gentler now. The digital forensics revealed significant communication between them. Text messages, emails, even a shared photo album in the cloud. She handed me printed copies of text exchanges that made me feel physically ill. Messages that started professionally 6 months ago and gradually became personal, then flirtatious, then explicitly sexual. I saw my wife's words, the same woman who told me she loved me every morning, telling another man how much she missed him, how excited she was to see him, how their time together was the best part of her week. One exchange from 2 weeks ago made me set the papers down and close my eyes. "Sarah, David's been asking about working late so much. I think I need to be more careful." "Marcus, maybe it's time to tell him. We can't keep doing this forever." "Sarah, not yet. He's already stressed about the fertility stuff. I need more time to figure out how to handle this." "Marcus, I hate watching you pretend with him. You deserve to be happy." "Sarah, I am happy. When I'm with you, I'm the happiest I've ever been." The woman who'd been too tired for intimacy with me for the past 3 months, who'd cited stress and fertility pressure as reasons for our growing distance, had been telling another man He made her happier than she'd ever been. The shared photo album contains 347 pictures. Rebecca continued, apparently deciding to deliver all the information at once rather than draw out my agony. Dating back 4 months, meals, hotel rooms, what appeared to be weekend trips. Weekend trips. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. 3 of them. The dates correspond with times your wife told you she was attending design conferences or visiting her college roommate in Boulder. I remembered those weekends. I'd encouraged her to go, happy that she was reconnecting with old friends and investing in her professional development. I'd used the time to deep clean our house, to plan surprise date nights for when she returned, to research fertility specialists and adoption agencies for the family we were supposedly building together. She'd been building a different life entirely. "David, I need to ask about your financial accounts," Rebecca said carefully. "Has your wife had access to joint credit cards or savings?" I nodded numbly. "The hotel charges show up on your visa statement as Denver Hospitality Group. She's been paying for their meetings with your shared credit card." That detail, that Sarah had been using our money, our joint account, to fund her affair, somehow felt like the deepest betrayal yet. Not just the emotional and physical infidelity, but the financial insult of making me unknowingly pay for her deception. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, sliding a final document across the desk. "We tracked their communication patterns, and they're planning to meet tomorrow night. According to their messages, Sarah has told you she has a late client dinner." I stared at the restaurant name, another place, with significance to us, where we'd celebrated my promotion last year. Sarah was recycling our meaningful locations for her affair, erasing and replacing our memories with new ones. "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling lost and hollow. Rebecca's expression softened. "That depends on what you want the outcome to be. Some clients want to confront immediately with evidence. Others prefer to document everything first for divorce proceedings, and some want to give their spouse a chance to confess voluntarily." I thought about Sarah at home right now, probably crafting her story about tomorrow's fictional client dinner, maybe texting Marcus about how excited she was to see him. I thought about the past 6 months of lies, the careful deceptions, the way she'd looked me in the eye every morning and kissed me goodbye before going to work, where she spent her days planning our next betrayal. "I want to give her a chance to tell me the truth," I said finally. "But I want it to be on my terms, when I'm ready with all the facts in hand." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Document everything first. Make copies of all evidence. And David—" She looked at me seriously. "Call your sister. You're going to need emotional support for what comes next." Driving home with the manila folder on my passenger seat felt surreal. Inside were photographs and documents that proved my marriage was over, that the past 6 months of my life had been built on lies, that the woman I'd planned to grow old with had been systematically dismantling our relationship while I worried about fertility treatments and mortgage payments. Sarah was cooking dinner when I walked in, humming softly to herself in the kitchen. She looked up and smiled, the same smile that had made me fall in love with her 9 years ago, and for a moment I almost convinced myself that Rebecca's folder contained evidence about someone else's life. "How was your day?" She asked the same question she'd asked me thousands of times before. "Enlightening," I said, which was completely true. As we ate dinner together, making small talk about her work, lies, and my projects increasingly irrelevant, I watched my wife with new eyes. Every gesture, every expression, every word was now filtered through the knowledge of her double life. She was an actress, playing the role of devoted wife, while her real emotional energy was invested elsewhere. But I was learning to be an actor too. And tomorrow night, when Sarah thought she was meeting Marcus for another secret rendezvous, she was going to discover that some performances have unexpected audiences. I chose Giuseppe's for the Confrontation, the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our first anniversary dinner, where Sarah had cried happy tears and told me she'd never been so sure about anything in her life as she was about us. The irony felt appropriate. Sarah thought she was meeting Marcus there at 8 o'clock. According to their text messages, which Rebecca had been monitoring, they'd planned a special evening to celebrate what Marcus called taking the next step. I didn't want to know what that meant, but I suspected it involved Sarah finally deciding to leave me. She would find me instead. I arrived at 7:30 and requested our old table, the corner booth, with a view of the entrance where we'd sat exactly 7 years ago. The hostess recognized me. We'd been regulars here for years. "Anniversary celebration?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Something like that," I replied. At 7:55, I watched Sarah walk through the front door in the black dress I'd bought her for Christmas, her hair styled, the way I'd always told her looked beautiful. She was checking her phone, probably wondering why Marcus wasn't answering her texts. He wasn't answering because Rebecca had called in a favor with a police contact, and Marcus was currently being detained for questioning about an unrelated matter that would take exactly 2 hours to resolve. Sarah spotted me before the hostess could seat her. The expression that crossed her face, confusion, panic, then forced brightness, would have been comical if it weren't destroying my life. "David, what a surprise." She approached the table with the over-animated energy of someone buying time to construct a story. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for my wife," I said, calmly gesturing to the empty seat across from me. "Please sit down." She slid into the booth, her hands fidgeting with her purse, her eyes darting toward the entrance, still hoping Marcus would appear and somehow make this normal again. "I thought you had a client dinner tonight." I continued opening the menu as if this were a casual encounter. "Weren't you meeting with what was the name again? The tech startup downtown?" Sarah's pause was microscopic, but I caught it. The same hesitation I had noticed at her birthday party, the mental scramble to keep her stories straight. "Yes, but they had to reschedule last minute. Equipment malfunction or something. I was just going to grab a quick bite before heading home." She was speaking too fast, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "What about you? I thought you had that report to finish." "Finished early." I closed the menu and looked directly at her. "Sarah, we need to talk." Something in my tone made her facade crack slightly. The nervous energy intensified, and she started playing with her wedding ring, a tell she'd had since college when she was stressed about exams. "About what?" "About Marcus Hall." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. For a moment we sat in absolute silence while she processed that I knew. Not suspected, not wondered, knew. "David, Before you say anything," I interrupted gently, "I want you to know that I love you. I have loved you for 9 years, been married to you for 8, and spent the last 2 years imagining our future children. So when I ask you this question, I'm asking as someone who has devoted his adult life to you and our marriage." She was crying now, silent tears that she tried to wipe away discreetly. "Are you having an affair with Marcus Hall?" The question hung between us like a sword. This was her moment, her chance to tell the truth, to confess, to give us something to work with. I found myself hoping, despite everything Rebecca had shown me, that Sarah would choose honesty and our marriage over whatever she'd found with Marcus. "No," she said, meeting my eyes with desperate conviction. "David, no. Marcus is just a friend from college. I've told you about him." "Sarah," I kept my voice steady, compassionate even. "I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer. Are you having an affair with Marcus Hall?" She must have heard something in my tone, some indication that this wasn't a fishing expedition based on suspicion. Her tears came harder now, but her story remained unchanged. "I swear to you, David, Marcus is just a friend. Yes, we've gotten close since we reconnected, and maybe that's been confusing for me, but nothing has happened between us. Nothing physical, nothing." I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a single photograph on the table between us. Sarah entering the downtown hotel with Marcus, her hand on his arm, looking up at him with unmistakable intimacy. Sarah stared at the photo for a long time, her breathing shallow and rapid. When she looked up, something had changed in her expression. The panic was still there, but it was joined by something else, calculation. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, her voice stronger now. "Marcus was having a personal crisis. His father was in the hospital, and he needed someone to talk to. We went somewhere private because he was so upset and—" "Sarah, stop." The gentleness was gone from my voice, now replaced by exhaustion. "Please stop lying to me." I placed 3 more photographs on the table. Sarah and Marcus kissing in the hotel lobby. Sarah and Marcus entering an elevator together, his hand on the small of her back. Sarah and Marcus leaving the hotel 2 hours later, her lipstick gone, her hair slightly messed. "His father's not sick, is he?" I asked quietly. Sarah looked at the photos like they were evidence of someone else's life, as if staring long enough might make them disappear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to be sure, not long enough to understand why." She was fully crying now, ugly sobs that shook her shoulders. "David, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, I do. But Marcus and we just connected in a way that—" "How long?" I interrupted. 4 months, no 6. I don't know, it started gradually and I didn't realize." "How many times—" "David, please. How many times did you sleep with him while you were coming home to me and pretending everything was normal?" She couldn't answer, which was answer enough. I gathered the photographs and put them back in my jacket pocket. "Sarah, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow morning, I want you to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for a while. We both need time to think about what happens next." "David, wait, we can work through this. People get through affairs all the time. We can go to counseling, we can—" "The woman who would have fought for our marriage wouldn't have had the affair in the first place," I said, standing up from the table. "The woman I married would have talked to me when she felt disconnected, would have suggested counseling before she started sleeping with someone else." I left money on the table for drinks we'd never ordered and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Sarah call my name, but I didn't turn around. Outside the restaurant, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before calling Lisa. "How did it go?" she asked. "She lied. Even with photographs in front of her, she lied." "I'm sorry, David, but now you know who you're really dealing with." She was right. The Sarah I'd married would have confessed, apologized, begged for forgiveness. This woman, this stranger who wore my wife's face, had looked at undeniable evidence and tried to manipulate me with more lies. Tomorrow she would discover that the man she'd been lying to had learned some new skills of his own. I woke up Saturday morning to find Sarah's side of the bed empty and her car gone from the driveway. She'd left sometime during the night, probably to Marcus's apartment, though I no longer cared where she went or what stories she told herself about our confrontation at Giuseppe's. What mattered was that she'd made her choice, and now I could make mine. Lisa arrived at 9 a.m. with coffee and a thick folder that looked remarkably similar to Rebecca's evidence file. But this folder contained something different, my future. "Divorce papers," she announced, settling onto our living room couch with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "I've been preparing them since you hired Rebecca. Colorado is a no-fault state, but adultery still matters for asset division and spousal support. I'd always admired my sister's pragmatism, but seeing her transform my marriage into legal documents felt surreal. These papers represented the formal end of 8 years, the legal dissolution of the life Sarah and I had built together. I also have some other documents," Lisa continued, pulling out additional files. "Copyright assignments, intellectual property transfers, and a few other surprises that I think you're going to enjoy." She explained her strategy, a comprehensive legal offensive that would protect my assets while ensuring Sarah faced consequences for her choices. But the details that made me smile weren't about money or property division. You remember that design portfolio Sarah's been working on, the one she's been spending so much time on for her big presentation next month? I nodded. Sarah had been consumed with this project for months, working late nights and weekends on what she called her career-defining presentation to the design firm's biggest client. Well, according to her employment contract, which I had a colleague review, any work created during company time belongs to the firm. But any work created on personal time can be claimed by the employee provided they can prove independent creation and haven't used company resources. Lisa's smile was predatory. Sarah's been using your home computer, your software licenses, and your internet connection for this project. Technically, you've been subsidizing her work, but more importantly, she's been creating this portfolio while conducting an affair with her coworker on company time. The implications hit me immediately. Sarah's affair wasn't just personal betrayal, it was professional misconduct that violated her employment contract and potentially created liability for the design firm. I've drafted a letter to her employer documenting the affair and its impact on company resources and workplace professionalism, Lisa continued. Marcus Hall could face disciplinary action or termination for inappropriate workplace relationships. Sarah's big presentation might become someone else's opportunity. But Lisa wasn't finished. I also discovered something interesting about Marcus. He's married. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. What? Separated, but not divorced. His wife, Amanda Hall, filed for separation 8 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences. But legally, he's still married, which means his relationship with Sarah constitutes adultery in his own divorce proceedings. Lisa pulled out another document. Amanda Hall is represented by a colleague of mine. I took the liberty of sharing some information about Marcus's current situation. She was very interested to learn about his extracurricular activities, especially since he's been claiming financial hardship in their settlement negotiations while apparently having enough money for hotel rooms and expensive gifts. The web of consequences was expanding beyond what I'd imagined. Sarah's affair wasn't just destroying our marriage, it was imploding Marcus's divorce proceedings, threatening both their careers and potentially exposing them to professional and legal repercussions neither had considered. There's one more thing, Lisa said, saving the best for last. The house. Our home. The suburban Denver house where we'd planned to raise children, where Sarah had hosted her birthday party, where she'd been carrying on her affair via text message while sitting across from me at dinner, was titled in both our names. But the down payment had come entirely from my inheritance when my grandfather died. Colorado recognizes separate property claims for inherited assets, Lisa explained. With proper documentation, we can argue that your inheritance should be returned to you before any marital assets are divided. Sarah might find herself needing to find somewhere else to live sooner than she expected. By noon, Lisa had transformed our dining room table into a war room. Divorce papers, employment complaint letters, financial asset documentation, and evidence files were organized with military precision. She'd even prepared a timeline for serving papers and filing complaints to maximize impact while minimizing Sarah's ability to prepare counter-strategies. The beauty of this approach, Lisa explained, is that everything happens simultaneously. She can't address the legal issues without confronting the employment issues, and she can't resolve the employment issues without admitting to conduct that worsens her legal position. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen the first time she'd called since fleeing the house the night before. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice raw from crying. "I'm at Marcus's place, and we need to figure out how to handle this." "Handle what exactly?" I kept my tone neutral, professional. "Our marriage, this situation. I know you're angry, but we can work through this if we're both willing to. Sarah, I've filed for divorce." The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more defensive. You can't be serious. One mistake doesn't erase 8 years of marriage. I made an error in judgment, but people work through these things all the time. An error in judgment is forgetting to pay a bill or double booking a dinner reservation, I replied. A 6-month affair involving hotels, lies, and stolen time isn't an error in judgment. It's a choice, a series of choices. David, please. You'll be served with papers on Monday morning. I suggest you contact an attorney. What about the house? My job, we have a life together. You gave up that life when you chose Marcus over honesty. You gave up our future when you decided deception was easier than communication. I could hear her crying again, but it no longer moved me the way it once would have. These were the tears of someone facing consequences, not someone experiencing genuine remorse. I hope Marcus is worth it, I said quietly, and hung up. Lisa looked up from her papers when I rejoined her in the dining room. How do you feel? I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? For months, I'd been living with the sick uncertainty of suspicion, the constant low-level anxiety of knowing something was wrong, but not being able to prove it. For weeks, I'd carried the devastating knowledge of Sarah's betrayal while planning my response. Now, with divorce papers prepared and consequent strategies in motion, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. Free, I said finally. I feel free. Good, Lisa replied, returning to her documents. Because tomorrow, we start building your new life. And David. She looked up at me with the fierce protectiveness that had made her both a formidable sister and an excellent attorney. Your new life is going to be so much better than the lie you've been living. As the afternoon sun streamed through our dining room windows, my dining room windows now, I realized she was right. For 8 years, I'd been married to someone who was capable of systematic deception, someone who could look me in the eye every morning and lie about the most fundamental aspects of our relationship. Now I was married to no one, which was infinitely better than being married to a stranger who happened to share my wife's name. Sarah Miller had made her choices. Now she would live with the consequences, and I would finally live with the truth.